Hey guys, welcome back to the 4-1 Wheat. Today I'm going to show you how to take apart a desktop keyboard and clean it. Now if you notice here, I have two different types of keyboards. One that has a tall key and one that has a shorter key. Now the way that we clean these is pretty much the same steps. All you need to do so is a flathead screwdriver. Now you're also going to need a Phillips screwdriver if you want to make sure that you're cleaning every bit of the keyboard. But for now we're just going to use our flathead screwdriver. And I'm going to show you on this keyboard first, and then I'm going to finish up on the other keyboard because it's a little bit easier overall. Now if you notice underneath these keyboards there is a space. Now all you have to do is literally put a flathead screwdriver, push down on a key or get over to the edge and get behind one of these keys and just pop it out and kind of wiggle it back and forth until it comes. These keys have a little spacer inside right here that locks down into this groove, and anytime you press this key, this flat part across the bottom pushes on that clear piece you see in there. And again, we'll see that a little bit better in a second or in a minute when we get to that part. Now again, this keyboard is a little bit more complicated. Now I'm going to show you it's pretty simple. Just figure out the orientation of the key, line it up, and you can just press until you hear it snap and it's good to go. I'm going to go back to this keyboard because it's a little bit more basic and you can see every key and they pop out a little bit more, and there's a few things I want to talk about with specific to this keyboard when we get to it. Now it's a good idea to take a camera and maybe take a screenshot of the QWERTY area. We call this the QWERTY because the keys make QWERTY. There's tons of different keyboard layouts. Some are better than others depending on what you're doing, but for basic computer use, the QWERTY keyboard is the pretty much general one that's used. Across the top we have what's known as function keys. They're labeled F1 to F12, and on a laptop those keys can do different functions as opposed to different applications calls, what they call for each of these keys. And generally on a keyboard for a laptop you'll have an FN key down here at the bottom. When you hold this FN key on a laptop and you press the number, that lets you do whatever that keyboard shortcut might do for a laptop. Also make sure you take a good picture of this area of the keyboard. All keyboards have different areas how keys are laid out here, and you may have some specific keys up here, as well as this area may be laid out a little bit different. The print, screen, scroll lock, and pause break may be over here, or they may be located elsewhere. So again, make sure you have a picture of your keyboard, because depending on the keyboard layout would depend on how you want to put the keys back on. When we come to put this keyboard back together, if we switch up these keys every once in a while, it could cause havoc further on down the line. Once you're ready to start removing the keys, it's a good idea to have some sort of bucket close by so you can keep up with all of the keys and they don't get misplaced across your house or your desk, wherever you may be working. So all I want to do is I want to start in this bottom corner by the control key. And again, I'm just going to put my flathead screwdriver here and pull it out. And notice these are laid out a little bit different than the previous one we saw, but still overall it's the same general way they install or remove. The reason I started here is the shift key has a specific type of tool or connection behind it, and they have this little sway bar, and this little bar allows the shift key, since it's so large in one insert, to keep on track and to keep straight from going side and side on the keyboard. On the other hand, the space bar also has that same style bar below it, and we'll come back to this when we go to insert this back on the keyboard. So real quick, I'm just going to start removing all of these keys and fast forward the video so you don't have to watch. Now that we're finished, you may know that once I've pulled these keys up, there are grooves around every key. So if you were to spill coffee or a drink on top of your keyboard, it actually would just seep down up in these grooves and it wouldn't get inside of the keyboard where the electronics are. Now, that's a very good idea for the keyboard manufacturers to keep stuff outside of this circuit board that's inside of here. And we're going to see that in a second. But what's good to note is since all of these keys have that allowance to make the liquids go around it, that's a good idea, and this is a good way to clean a keyboard if you happen to have spilt something. And I used again this keyboard on purpose because the other keyboard, the grooves or the lands and hills, I guess you could say, weren't as dramatic of a difference. Now what we want to do is we want to look at your keyboard and see if there might be any screws inside anywhere in here holding this piece of plastic together. This one does not. So what I'm going to do is flip the keyboard over. And on this side, I notice I have different screws. This is where I want to get my Phillips screwdriver and just set my keyboard down and go through all of these screws and take them off. And again, I have a magnetic screwdriver, so it's pulling the screw up with it. But when we take these off, we want to make sure we keep these close by. And you might want to write down or get a piece of paper and draw the keyboard and maybe punch holes to see where the screws go if you may have different sizes. I've done this before and all of these are the same size, so I can just throw them all in there and get whatever one I need when I get to that point. Once we have all the screws removed, if we look, double check on this side to make sure there's no screws, sometimes you could just kind of pull up on it or wiggle it a little bit and the top will come off. So this is the part we actually want to clean. There's nothing electronic connected to it anymore, so I can set this off to the side. And on our keyboard, we can see here's the electronics board and here's the piece that allows the keys to depress. And when the keys press this piece down, it makes contact on this electric board behind it. Now in some cases you may want to actually clean this electronic board that's behind it, and that's very possible to do as well. All there are holding it on are 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. No screws are holding this piece on at all. You'll see that in a second. So I'm just going to remove these 3 screws. And I want to keep these separate from my other ones to make sure I don't use the wrong screws here. However, these are silver and the others were black, so I can still put them together and that be okay. So I'm going to remove these 4 screws. And you might want to double check to make sure you're not touching too much of this electronic board that you have to. The more you touch, the more of a chance you have of something to go wrong. Once you loosen up all these screws, you can take this cable and kind of wiggle it up until the board comes off, and make sure you take this with it and make sure it's oriented correctly when you go to put that back on. We'll set this to the side along with the cable. Then I can go ahead and start taking my electronic board off, and you can just grab in a corner, it really doesn't matter. And notice there's 3 layers to it. There's the plastic layer and then 2 electronic circuits and then a spacer. And to show you what's actually going on, I'm going to remove this piece here. Notice we have 2 boards, the bottom board, the top board, and then the spacer that's in between. This spacer is keeping these boards from touching. So when this board touches this board in those dots, anywhere there's a specific dot, that is where a key is going to be pressed. So this is keeping this board from touching that board. However, whenever I take my piece here that I rolled over, whenever these buttons are pressed, that causes this electronic board to create contact with the board below it. So these 2 buttons actually meet and the computer knows those buttons were pressed and go ahead and do that function or type that key or whatever it may be. So I want to make sure I keep these in order, the top separate from the bottom, because that could cause an issue later down the road as well. I'll just take this all in one piece, lay it to the side, and then notice we still have one other piece in here. That's a rubber piece, so you could take a screwdriver and kind of get behind it and pull it up if you can't get it. And we'll set that to the side as well. So here we have the bottom piece of our keyboard, and no electronics are connected to it. There are some stickers, and we might not want the stickers on there, but if you want to keep them, that's fine. What I suggest to do is take these two pieces separately. Do not connect them back. Make sure they stay separate, and you can put them in the dishwasher, and literally you can clean it. If you have a really clean dishwasher and you feel uncomfortable putting this in the same place that your dishes go, you can just spray it down with bleach or Clorox or some type of cleaning solvent and just let it dry out. Now we have all of these keys, and these keys from a keyboard for the most part stay clean because you're typing on the top of them, or you've probably cleaned the top of the keys before. However, they could still have liquid that's connected to them or something that's causing it to stick whenever you're trying to type. So we want to clean these keys as well, but we can't put the keys in the dishwasher or go outside and hose these down as easily. One thing I suggest is go to your local store and buy a laundry cleaning bag, and they generally have a zipper with a big pouch, and you could just take the keys, stick them in the pouch, zip the pouch back up, put it in the dishwasher, or go outside and hose this down and clean them off, and it'll be fairly easy to do. When you finish cleaning your keyboard, you want to put it back together. We're going to do the same steps we've done before. We'll take our pieces in the exact order they were removed to replace them. So we'll start with that. We'll move on to our keyboard circuit. This piece right here, and again, we'll lay all three pieces down in order. You can take this piece off if it helps to get this lined up appropriately. And generally there are going to be little grooves on your keyboard where the circuit boards go on to keep them aligned and together. Now notice this circuit right here is on top of that piece I just set down. That's going to come into play in a minute. Next we'll get our keyboard circuit and we'll line it up. These tabs are going to fall into little holes, so it's fairly simple to keep in line. This is a little bit of a pain to kind of get lined up, so I'm going to twist this around to the side and then put that piece on and then put my circuit board down. Now my cable is connected appropriately in the back and all of the holes are lining up for the screws. Alright, so I'm going to take my metal piece and make sure it's laid on appropriately as well. And be careful how the grooves go, because there are a way that it needs to be in order to work appropriately. These metal pieces are actually making a ground with the keyboard, with the circuit, so it doesn't short out. If you notice, what I did was just hand tight these screws fairly loosely to keep them just in play, to keep everything snug in location. And then I'm going to come back and take turns tightening them one at a time to make sure everything is snug. And again, we don't want to over tighten because this is plastic and it will strip very easily. Once that's down, I can take my rubber keyboard or the inlay and lay it on top, making sure everything lines up appropriately. This just takes a second to do, and I'm just pressing down everywhere to make sure it's pressed fully. Once that's laid down nicely, I can take my top piece of my keyboard and just lay it on top and just line it up really slow. And then when I get close, it'll kind of make a noise telling me it's on. And I'm going to push all the way around, hold it really tight as I flip it over, lay it down, and then I'm going to take my other screws and put them in location. And I'm going to start in the middle just to keep it all one piece. And again, I'm not doing it too tight just because I want to do these one at a time, and I want to get the whole frame on first. And you can skip around once you get the first few on. Now comes the fun part, putting all the keys back on the keyboard. So the first two I want to put on are the shift key and the space bar. And again, I'm doing this because they're a little bit more complicated than just simply pressing in place. So the first thing I want to do is make sure this bar that's underneath is actually underneath these little clamps underneath, if you will. And I'm not going to press them underneath. I'm going to let the keyboard or the key actually press itself under there. Now comes the fun part of figuring out where the keys go. And this is where it would be good to have either another keyboard to see your layout or to have those pictures handy. So I'm just going to take one key at a time, figure out where it goes, snap it into place. Now if you notice the J key, this is a key for a home row. If you're familiar with typing, you always start with your index finger on the J, and it has this little groove at the bottom so you know that you're there. And these do not fit in a normal key slot. This key slot for the J is actually a little bit smaller than the others to allow for the smaller piece to fit. I have two Alt keys that are exactly the same. They're the same width, they're the same height, they're the same curvature, so it doesn't matter which one of these I put on either side of the keyboard, they are the same exact key. I just waited to make sure because in your case, your Alt keys may be a little bit different than mine. Now I waited to show you this as well. These two window keys are a little bit different. If you notice, this one has a curve on the bottom left corner and this was perfectly square. So I know this one goes in this location and the curved one goes over here in this location. Now I waited to do the arrow keys to show you a few different things because these can be a little difficult to put back in place. So what I want to do for sure is I want to take off one of these keys right here on the end just to show you something. On this particular key, notice how the little grooves are actually on the sides. They're not on the top. So when I take this key and I look at the grooves, I know it's going to be in this orientation. So it's either going to be the left key, or if I flip it, it's going to be the right key. It can't be the down or the up key because the grooves will not turn that way in order to put it in place. So I know with that clip in the same orientation, this is not going to be my left key because my arrows are going to be on the bottom side of my key. So I know this is my right arrow key. And I can place that there and notice it stays. Same concept is true with this one. I know this is my left key because the groove is going to be on the left side. And you can also see the angle of the key, how it's slimmed at the top rather than the bottom half. So these are going to go in just like this. And again, I know I want the bigger side towards the bottom. So I know this is going to be my down arrow key, which leaves me with one more key, and that is my up arrow key. So now that we have a clean keyboard, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.